John D. Rockefeller. Just saying the name conjures up images of insane wealth, absolute power, and a legacy that, honestly, we're still arguing about more than 100 years later. So, was he this brilliant industrialist who literally built America? Or was he a ruthless monopolist who basically wrote the book on corporate greed? To even begin to answer that, you have to grasp just how powerful he really was.
To really get a handle on Rockefeller, you gotta understand this number. At his absolute peak, his personal fortune was worth almost 2% of the entire US economy. Now let that sink in. To put that in perspective for you, no one else, not Bill Gates, not Jeff Bezos, nobody, has even come close to controlling that much of the country's economic pie. By that measure, he was, without a doubt, the richest person in modern history.
And that incredible wealth? Well, that's where our big question comes from. On one hand, you've got the industrial savior, the guy who looked at the messy, chaotic oil industry and hammered it into the super efficient machine that made light and heat affordable for millions of people. But on the other hand, you've got the robber baron, a predator who one newspaper called the head of the most cruel, impudent, pitiless, and grasping monopoly that ever fastened upon a country. So which one is it? The only way to find out is to follow the story.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll look at his wild upbringing, the rise of his unstoppable Standard Oil machine, and then the moment it all came crashing down, which led to this incredible pivot to philanthropy that would end up defining the second half of his life.
You just can't understand Rockefeller the man without understanding the two people who raised him, because they were polar opposites. You had his father, a literal con artist, and his mother, a deeply devout Baptist. So his dad, William Rockefeller, everybody called him Big Bill, was this traveling snake oil salesman, a total grifter. He even bragged about cheating his own sons in deals just to teach them a lesson, to make them sharp. The big takeaway from his dad was pretty simple. Always get the better end of the deal. But the real rock in his life, the person who had the most influence, was his mother, Eliza. She was incredibly religious and just fanatically frugal. She drilled into him the idea that you had to be disciplined, you had to work hard, and you never, ever waste a single penny. To her, waste was basically a sin. And that combination, his father's cunning and his mother's discipline, that became the blueprint for his entire life. And boy, did he apply that blueprint. He took it straight to the wild, booming, and incredibly wasteful oil business of the 19th century. And he created the legend, Standard Oil. By the late 1870s, it wasn't even a competition anymore. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled over 90% of all the oil refined in the United States. Think about that. It wasn't just a big company. For all intents and purposes, it was the oil industry. So how on earth did he pull that off? Well, he had this killer three-part strategy. First, radical, and I mean radical efficiency. While other guys were just dumping almost half a barrel of crude oil as waste, Rockefeller sold everything. Gasoline to fuel his own refineries, tar for paving roads, even paraffin wax for chewing gum. Nothing was wasted. Second, he used his massive size to force the railroads to give him secret discounts, rebates, that nobody else got, that gave him a huge leg up on costs. And third, what they called the buy or bury approach. He'd go to a competitor, open his books, and make them a fair offer to buy them out. If they said no, he'd just slash his prices until they went bankrupt. And the speed was just unreal. There was this period later called the Cleveland Massacre, where Rockefeller bought out 22 of his 26 competitors in less than 4 months. Now, to Rockefeller, he was an angel of mercy. He was bringing order to a chaotic industry. But if you were one of his rivals, yeah, it was a complete wipeout. This relentless growth made Rockefeller the most powerful businessman on the planet, but it also made him the most feared and the most hated. A huge public backlash was coming for him. The person who really led the charge was an investigative journalist named Ida Tarbell, and for her, this was personal. Her own father's small oil business had been crushed by Rockefeller. Her incredible 1904 expose, The History of the Standard Oil Company, laid bare all the secret deals and ruthless tactics, and it completely turned the public against him. And pretty soon you started seeing these political cartoons everywhere. Rockefeller as this monstrous octopus, with its tentacles strangling small businesses and wrapping themselves around the U.S. Capitol. He wasn't a captain of industry anymore. He was this greedy king who answered to no one. The public anger got so intense that the government finally had to act. Using a law called the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Supreme Court declared in 1911 that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly.
The court ordered the entire empire to be shattered into 34 separate companies. And you'll recognize their names today: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron. The biggest company in the world had been brought to its knees. But this is where the story takes a fascinating turn. He was forced out of the business he'd spent his whole life building. So what did he do? He spent the last 40 years of his life on a brand new project, giving all that money away. And he went at philanthropy with the same obsessive, systematic approach he used in business. He basically created the University of Chicago out of thin air. He established the Rockefeller Institute, which completely revolutionized medical research. His money funded the campaign that wiped out hookworm from the American South. And he created the Rockefeller Foundation to tackle huge global problems. The amount of money was just staggering. He gave away over $530 million in his lifetime, which in today's money is well over $10 billion. But here's the thing. It's not just that he gave away money. He basically invented the idea of modern, large-scale strategic philanthropy. So, here we are at the end, looking at the final ledger. How do we reconcile the two halves of this one life? The ruthless monopolist and the groundbreaking philanthropist, the builder and the giver. This quote right here, I think it gets to the very core of how Rockefeller saw the world. He was a huge believer in what's called social Darwinism. For him, business was just like nature. The weak get weeded out, and the strongest, most efficient organism, in this case Standard Oil, was just destined to win. It wasn't mean, it wasn't personal, it was just business. So let's lay it all out one last time. The methods? They were brutal. He destroyed his rivals, he used secret deals, and he built a monopoly that choked out all competition. No question. But the results? Well, they're kind of undeniable too. He made oil cheaper for everyone, his money helped create modern medicine as we know it, and he pioneered the whole idea of giving back on a global scale. Which leaves us with this one final, really tough question. Do the ends justify the means? His philanthropy saved millions of lives, no doubt, but it was all paid for with a fortune built by destroying thousands of livelihoods. That's the paradox of John D. Rockefeller. And it's a question we're still asking today when we look at the giants of our own time. So saint or sinner? Maybe the only real answer is that he was somehow both.